In August of 1944, in the Second World War, the United States Army Air Forces published an intelligence summary for its own officers. Buried in it is a sentence about the small parachute bombs American crews had been dropping on Japanese airfields for 2 years. The sentence reads, "The statement as to duds among parachute frag bombs is correct." The statement. Somebody else had made the statement. The Japanese had been saying that American bombs were landing and not going off. And here is the Army Air Forces, in its own publication, agreeing with them. 23 pounds of steel, the AN-M40 fragmentation bomb, lowered on a parachute out of the bomb bay of a B-25. It was one of the most effective weapons of the Pacific Air War, and for a while they were hitting the ground and doing nothing at all. The reason was 0.6 of a second. If you want more from the archive, the documents rather than the legends, subscribe. Start with the problem the bomb was invented to solve. A fighter parked on a jungle airstrip is a small target. To be sure of it, you have to come in low enough to see it, and by 1942 the 5th Air Force was doing exactly that in New Guinea, running A-20s and B-25s across Japanese fields at the height of the palm trees. The difficulty is arithmetic. A bomb dropped from 100 feet is still directly beneath the aeroplane when it goes off. The aircraft flies into its own fragments, the other answer being developed at the same time. Skip bombing, in which a bomb is released low and flat and bounces into the target like a stone across water, solved the problem for ships and hardened targets. The parachute bomb was the answer for the airstrips themselves. George Kenney, who commanded Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, had been chewing on this since 1928. His answer was to put a parachute on a small fragmentation bomb so that the bomb hung in the air while the aeroplane kept going. When he arrived in the Pacific, he found 3,000 of them sitting in war reserve, unwanted. There were no racks that would carry them, so he handed the problem to a maintenance officer named Paul Gunn, universally called Pappy, who built a contraption the crews called the squirrel cage, parafrag stacked in fours, nose to tail, so that a pilot over a target could toggle the whole lot at once. Ennis Whitehead, Kenney's deputy commander of the 5th Air Force, was among those who drove the tactic into regular practice once the racks were working. Kenney had carried the idea for 14 years before anyone let him use it. When it worked, MacArthur pinned a purple heart on him for it, an odd decoration for a man who had not been wounded, and the citation said what it was for: meritorious service in developing the bomb. On the 12th of September, 1942, by Kenney's account, Captain Don Hall led 9 A-20s of the 89th Attack Squadron over the Japanese strip at Buna. The Japanese had spent the previous day filling in holes so they could land 22 aircraft before dark, and those aircraft were still sitting there. Hall's formation came in over the palms in 2 waves, strafing, and each aeroplane laid down 40 parafrags strung about 50 yards apart. 17 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, 9 of them by Hall himself. The leading 4 aeroplanes drew anti-aircraft fire. The second wave came back and reported that everything was quiet as a grave. And something happened on the ground that Kenney thought worth writing down. The parachutes opened, and according to Kenney's account, some of the Japanese on that field looked up, decided that what they were watching was a parachute landing, and ran out into the open with their rifles to shoot at it. Kenney was not over Buna. He is reporting what his crews reported, and he hedges it himself. They evidently thought is how he puts it, but it is not only his story. A year later, on the 12th of October 1943, 5th Air Force bombers went over Rabaul with parafrags, and the Air Evaluation Board's study of that operation recorded the same thing in a single flat line. They mistook the parafrags for an Allied airborne landing. The fragments from one of these bombs, Kenney wrote, will take a man's legs off 100 feet from where it lands. Those tactics reached their most celebrated expression in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March of 1943, where B-25s using both skip bombing and parafrags helped destroy a Japanese convoy. It was the moment the Pacific Press and the High Command both noticed what Kenny and Whitehead had built. The ANM-40 was no longer an experiment. Now, the story that has grown up around this weapon. The version you will find repeated is that the parafrag had a fatal early flaw, that the chutes opened in the disturbed air behind the aeroplane, that armed bombs swung back into their own tails, that bombers were lost, and that the fuse was hurriedly given a delay to stop it happening. That is not what the record says. Technical Manual TM 91904, the Army's Ammunition Inspection Guide, printed in 1944, describes the fuse as designed. The delay was not added afterwards. It was there from the beginning, and the manual states plainly what it was for. A delay in arming, incorporated in the fuse, prevents premature detonation of the bomb due to malfunction of the parachute or collision during flight. Read that again. Chute failure and collision are not the accident the delay failed to prevent. They are the reason the delay exists. The engineers thought of it first. The official history of the Army Air Forces goes further, and it goes the other way. In its account of the Papuan campaign, the parachute is not the problem. The parachute is the solution to the problem, the thing that made low-level bombing survivable in the first place, and the weapon it describes is a 23-pound fragmentation bomb armed with an instantaneous fuse, first tried in combat over Buna with outstanding success. There is no mishap in that chapter. There is no withdrawal. In the manuals, in the official history, and in Kenny's own memoir, the crisis simply is not there. So where did the story come from? It came from three true things, standing close together. The first is that parafrags could hang up in the bomb bay instead of falling clear, and that when one did, it was still attached to a live aeroplane. That is not folklore. There is a case with names on it. On the 8th of January 1945, over Fabrica airfield on Negros, a B-25 of the 345th Bomb Group had bombs caught in the bay. When Lieutenant John Boyd opened the doors, two drifted clear. The third, still tangled in its chute, struck the fuselage and detonated. It opened a 3-foot hole in the floor between the pilot and the radio operator and a 4-foot gash in the ceiling. Sergeant Robert Dusenberry, the radio operator, went into shock. Sergeant William McGrath, the tail gunner, talked Boyd out of ordering the crew to jump, because Dusenberry could not have jumped. Boyd landed at Tacloban with a 4th parafrag still hanging in the bomb bay. That is a hung bomb, already armed, striking the aircraft that was trying to get rid of it. It is not a tail strike, no aircraft was lost, and it happened in 1945, more than 2 years into the weapon's service. The second true thing is the one that most resembles the legend, and it is a different bomb entirely. The 250-pound parachute demolition bomb, the Parademo, had a documented failure in which the drag of the chute, with the bomb nosing down, bent the tail assembly into the fuse, stopped the vane turning and prevented detonation. That is 5th Air Force Ordnance's own technical report from 1945. A parachute, a tail, a fouled fuse. Every noun in the story is there. It is the wrong weapon, and the result was not a lost bomber. The result was a dud, and the third is simpler still. On the 27th of November 1943 near Wewak, a B-25 called Bugger Off was flown under another bomber with its bay open. White parachutes came out of the aircraft above. A cluster of them shattered Bugger Off's canopy and very nearly cut the aeroplane in two. Lieutenant Alfred Nagel survived because he was wearing his steel helmet. That is a formation-keeping failure. The bombs worked exactly as designed. They were simply dropped onto a friendly aircraft. 3 real incidents, none of them a design fault. And over 80 years they have fused into one story about a bomb that killed the men who dropped it. The actual defect ran the other way, And to see it, you have to be precise about what the delay was. The parafrag's fuse fires the instant it touches anything. What the delay governs is not when the bomb explodes, but when it becomes capable of exploding. For the first 2.5 seconds after the parachute pulls the arming wire, the striker cannot fire at all. The parachute is what buys the aeroplane its distance. The arming delay is the guarantee that the bomb cannot go off while the aircraft is still near it, which is a sound design, provided the bomb has 2.5 seconds. Combat crews were not flying the height the fuse had been built around. They were going lower because low was the only way to be certain of a parked aircraft or a fuel drum. Below 100 feet, the bomb reaches the ground before the arming sequence has finished running. It hits and nothing happens. The weapon is not broken, it simply never got the time it needed to switch itself on. There is a second effect working alongside the first. The parachute does not only slow the bomb, it swings it, pulling the tail up so the nose comes down square. Released too low, there is no time for that either. The bomb strikes at an angle, on the flank of its casing rather than the point of its nose, and a fuse meant to be set off by a flat blow can survive a glancing one. And the first people to say any of this out loud were on the wrong side of the airfield. Japanese troops on those fields were finding American bombs in the dirt with their chutes spread out behind them and their casings whole. For an army being strafed every few days, an enemy bomb that has failed is worth having, and the Japanese examined them closely enough to have something to say about them. What they said about them traveled and reached American intelligence as a claim about American equipment. Which brings us back to the summary of August 1944 and the remarkable thing in it. The Army Air Forces did not dismiss the claim. It printed the concession and then it printed the cause. The principal cause, the document says, release of parafrags from altitudes below 100 feet, which did not allow bomb fuses sufficient time to arm completely. There is no dud rate in that document. It does not say how many, and neither will I. The record gives a fault, not a figure. But it gives something better. It gives the remedy in the same paragraph in the past tense, because by the time anybody wrote it down, it had already been done. Time of fuse arming was changed from 2.5 seconds to 1.9, and the fuse standardized as the AN-M120A1, written in some documents as AN-M120A1. 0.6 of a second, small enough to look like a rounding error on a specification sheet, large enough that the document spells out exactly what it bought. This allows altitude of release to be reduced to approximately 60 feet for individual bombs, but clusters require 100 feet, 60 feet. The crews had been flying that low anyway. The paperwork had finally come down to meet them. Nothing about the aeroplane changed. Nothing about the tactic changed. No new bomb, no new rack, no redesign. An engineer took 0.6 of a second out of a mechanism about the size of a fist, and a weapon that had been arriving inert began to arrive armed. An American bomb, corrected by a Japanese complaint. Not a laboratory in the United States. Not a board of engineers at a drafting table. A remark from the men underneath the bombs carried back through intelligence channels, printed in an American summary alongside 4 words most air forces would never have printed at all. The statement is correct. The legend has it that this weapon was dangerous to the men who carried it. The record says something less dramatic and harder to admit. For a while, it was not dangerous enough. And the people who noticed first were the ones standing on the airfield, looking down at a bomb in the dirt that had not gone off.